From deep inside the piney woods of northeast Texas, you are listening to Talk of the Night. And now, your host, Paranormal Phil. Good evening, good morning, wherever you may be around the world. I am Paranormal Phil from deep inside the piney woods of northeast Texas. And tonight we got a guest on that is the author of several books of paranormal nonfiction, including 44 Years in Darkness, Fractured Spirits, Haunting at Peoria State Hospital, Grave Deeds and Dead Plots, and also the book that we're going to be the couple books that we're going to be talking about tonight is uh, Gone on Vacation. There's two of them, Gone on Vacation museums, zoos, and uh, amusement parks. Good thing. Uh, but we also got her other book, Gone on Vacation, Endless Summer. So please welcome my guest tonight, Sylvia Shultz.
Hello, I'm so delighted to be here.
It's great to see your face on camera this time. But anyways, tell the viewers a little bit about you and the whole work that you do as a writer and paranormal investigator.
Of course. Well, I have always been fascinated with ghost stories, and also I've always been fascinated with history. Um, I am just intrigued by the idea of these people that lived decades or a couple centuries ago had the same likes, dislikes, hopes, dreams, fears that we do today, with a little bit of riffing on a theme. But yeah, really, they were just the same as we are. They just happen to have two dates on their gravestones rather than just one so far.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I really enjoy learning about the history of the places that I choose to write about, as well as the ghost stories.
Okay, now it's been a while since I've had you on the show. I think it's been 4 years.
It's been a
And
hot
if
minute,
anybody
yeah.
wants to check out that show, it's still, I believe it's still up on Spreaker and on the YouTube channel. But it's audio only, so this time you get video. But
Yeah.
anyways, uh, what have for the listeners, what have you been up to since that show? Because I know
Oh,
we
girl.
talked about your fractured spirits hauntings at uh, the PRS State Hospital during that show.
Yes. That's what we were talking about last show was all about the history and hauntings at the Peoria State Hospital in Bartonville, Illinois. I am still associated with the asylum, but I have branched out into writing even more books, and I've gone. I write about things worldwide now, not just one tiny little corner of Illinois. I've written a couple of books in the Grave Deeds and Dead Plots series, which you mentioned earlier. That is, I decided to expand my wheelhouse a little bit and go into true crime stories that have resulted in hauntings. The line between true crime and paranormal is vanishingly thin anyway.
Mm.
So I thought, let's put together a series of stories that have their origins in true crime but have resulted in ghost stories.
Well, that's interesting because I mean I had a guest on. I think he was the third guest that I had on when I returned to the show,
Hmm.
and he worked in law enforcement and talked about hauntings at prisons and what got him into the paranormal.
Oh,
So
neat.
I mean that actually would probably be a good person to talk to get
Yeah,
some stories from. I'll probably send his information your way.
please
Uh,
do. Yeah.
Now, I think you mentioned it, but do you still uh, go to Pierre State Hospital and still do investigations and still write about it?
Oh, yeah. I still am associated with the hospital. They're having their a couple of times a year they have vendors congregate, and they have like craft fairs and whatnot. And their dark fair is coming up Labor Day weekend, and my fiance and I are going to have a booth there, and we're both going to be selling books, which is really a special treat for me, sharing a booth with someone. Um, and that actually speaks to what would have happened at the asylum when it was still a going concern. These patients were encouraged to socialize. They loved it. They had parties all of the time. They had parties for the birthdays of every patient that lived in each cottage. Every patient celebrated their birthday. They had Christmas parties, they had Halloween parties. So they were encouraged to socialize. So they would have absolutely loved the idea of people wandering around with a craft fair and different items for sale. I think they would have found that fascinating. So I'm sure the ghosts will be out in force next weekend when we are the hilltop is just swarming with people having a good time and spending money on stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure it's gonna ramp up, especially as we get closer to Halloween and the veil
Oh
between
yeah.
our world and the spirit world getting its thinnest. But
Hmm.
yeah, me, I'm working on trying to get this podcast going good to where I'm traveling to different places. Like I went to the Texas Honors Convention just to kind of help promote my podcast and get guests. And I don't think I don't think we got any guests from there, but I did get a sponsor from there, or somewhat of a sponsor. It's more of
Splendid.
a uh, collaborating between the two. He promotes my podcast. I promote his uh, business and
Wonderful.
podcast. Oh wait, I do have him as a guest as a guest coming up later on down the road.
Hmm.
But yeah, eventually, like there's a thing coming up in September, the end of September, that I'm trying to get to as soon as I find out more information. It's more about cryptids uh,
Ah,
and Bigfoot campfire stories, and see
what
if I can't
fun.
broadcast live for there. But I'm trying to expand my role and get out there more instead of just being in the studio talking to the guests. I could be out there talking to the people.
Nice. That's
Uh,
always so much fun.
Something different than from what I did before. So
Yeah.
tonight we're talking about the Gone on Vacation books, and there's two
Yeah.
different ones, Endless Summer and the other one. And what is the difference between the two for the listeners, viewers?
Hey. Well, first of all, these two books were just ridiculous amounts of fun to write. So what happened was, years and years ago, I was at a paranormal convention and I was talking with a friend of mine, and she mentioned that she used to work at Brookfield Zoo in the Chicago area, in the suburb of Brookfield, and that it was haunted. And I was immediately entranced because I grew up in that area. I grew up in LaGrange, which is 10-15 minutes from Brookfield Zoo. I used to go there all the time when I was a kid. Um, so hearing that that place from my childhood that I loved so much was haunted was just absolutely wonderful. And I thought, what a cool idea for a book, to do a book on haunted zoos. And I thought to myself, well, let's expand this a little more. Let's do something. Let's not focus just on zoos. Let's do zoos, museums, and amusement parks. I'll bet that would be a good combination. So that was Gone on Vacation. That was the first book in the series. Haunted zoos, museums, and amusement parks. And I had an absolute blast writing it. And I had so much fun that I decided to do another book. That's not exactly what happened. So what happened was that I was on a different podcast promoting Gone on Vacation, and the host was this lovely English lady, and she was talking about a haunted historic village in England, in the Black Country in England. And I thought to myself, why? How could I have missed out haunted villages like that? Historic villages. That would be a perfect place to go on vacation.
yeah, it's like
So,
it's over it's someplace that most people have never been, and
yeah,
something that somebody
yeah,
else might like to hear about,
right,
especially if they're
right,
closer
yeah.
to it.
So I knew by the end of that conversation that I knew I needed to write another book. So that ended up being Gone on Vacation, Endless Summer, ended up being more zoos, more museums, more amusement parks, haunted historic villages, haunted house attractions that are actually paranormally active. And I found not one, not two, but three haunted botanical gardens.
Wow. That's new to me, but anyways, yeah, because I got out of the field probably about 6 years ago, and I spent 30 years in the field. I can talk about it all day, but just going out and doing the investigations, not for me anymore. I'm getting up
Uh,
in age, but anyways, uh, talking about the first one, when did you write that one compared to the Endless Summer one?
let's see. Gone on Vacation came out, oh, 4 years ago? And then Endless Summer came out last year. Last about a year ago right now, so it's about a year old.
Okay,
So
now.
yeah, we have a couple
uh,
years between the books.
Okay, so what are some of the locations in that first book? Because I want to get into the locations from both books, but I want to talk about the first book first.
Of course. So for the first one, like I said, that was the first one I did, and I thought it was going to be the only one I did. So I made sure to put some of my favorite places in there. Places like Brookfield Zoo, Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago. Um, and again, I grew up in the Chicago area, so I have been to all these places and a lot of these places. So I put in the Museum of Science and Industry that has the Pioneer Zephyr train. They have the coal mine the coal mine exhibit that is slightly haunted. For some of the exhibit, they actually got material and equipment from working coal mines where there had been deaths. So some of that residue was kind of on that equipment. But the Museum of Science and Industry also has the U-505, the captured German submarine. And that is delightfully haunted, and that is a marvelous story. I put in the Field Museum, and that has all sorts of activity. That has the lions of Tsavo, the man eaters of Tsavo, they when they were hunted and put down for being man eaters, the pelts were saved and eventually donated to the museum. And there was enough of the pelts left that they were able to make two mounts of these two maneless male lions. That's why one of them is lying on the ground because he didn't have enough belly fur left to make an entire mount. So one of the lions of Savo, the mounted specimen, is standing. The other one's lying on the ground, kind of in front of him, and that's because there's not enough belly skin to make an entire mounted specimen. But the Field Museum also has the Screaming Mummy. So when I was a kid, my dad would tell all these wonderful Chicago ghost stories around the dining room table at supper time. And that was one of the very first ghost stories I ever heard was the screaming mummy at the Field Museum. So that's always held a very special place in my heart. I knew I had to write about it someday, and that book was its moment in the sun.
So most of the places in that first book are from the Chicago area, correct?
Not necessarily. There are a lot of them, but there are places in the first book that there's the British Museum. I wrote about several different zoos around the around the United States. I believe one of the zoos in the first book is on the Isle of Wight in England, and a lot of the uh, amusement parks are American based too. And there's one the Six Flags over Gurnee, that's a Chicago land based attraction.
Okay.
So,
Now,
but that is worldwide too.
yeah. Now, on some of these locations, especially in the Chicago area, you have visited, correct?
Yes, yes, I have.
And what have you experienced at those locations? And I do want to talk about PR State Hospital first because I know you spent a lot of time there
Yeah,
uh, and working with that project.
right. Well, I have been lucky enough to have visited a lot of these locations. I kind of did an investigation on the down low in the U-505. I sprung for a before hours tour of the submarine where there were, oh gosh, about 15 of us, I guess, a dozen, 15 people or so. And the guide walked us through the entire exhibit and took his time explaining all the history of it. And it was really fascinating. And then he let us have free run of the submarine. And I was very quiet about it because they don't really like investigators hanging
Uh,
out there, but and making them
it's the same with the Queen
making it
Mary.
known. Right. So I just very quietly had my recorder going and no, I didn't get much. I was asking questions in German. I was saying, what is your name? How did you die? Why don't you like women on your boat? Things like that. But I was asking the questions in German, trying to be, cool about it, and I didn't get any EVPs at all. But a friend of mine, Ursula Bielski, is a very prominent ghost hunter in the Chicago area. She did the same thing. She went on a U-505 tour and had her recorder going, and she got the she got a very strange EVP. It basically said 1100, or I'm sorry, it said 2100 in German,
Wow.
2100. And she was like, well, why would that come through? That's kind of strange. And she went through the entire exhibit, and the reason the U-505 is haunted is because her second commander, a man named Peter Czech, was a wildly ineffective commander, and his men pretty much hated him. And there came a time when the submarine was being shelled with depth charges from a Royal Air Force plane, and the sub was getting shelled. And Peter Czech was freaking out so hard about it that he was in the conning tower and he pulled out his service pistol and shot himself in the head.
Wow.
But it didn't kill him. So the second in command and everyone on the boat knew that they had to be really, really, really quiet because the Allied radar was searching
Yeah.
for them. So the second in command, the first officer, had the men drag Czech out of the conning tower, take him to his bunk, and hold a pillow over his face to smother him to stop him screaming.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, his and
Yeah.
the security guard that I talked to said that Czech was hated so much by his men that it wasn't any big hardship for them to smother him. They were kind of looking forward to it. But um, in the exhibit, the logbook of the submarine is still there. And Ursula was looking at the logbook and realized that on that date, there's a very terse entry into the logbook that said you know, 2300 hours, 11 o'clock at night in military
Mhm.
time, it just says Commandant tot, commander dead. So that was the time, that sound that she heard, someone saying the military time, was the time that the commander had passed away.
That's definitely an interesting EVP to have. I know I've gotten
Yeah.
some great EVPs in my time. Probably the most interesting one that I've ever gotten. I'm kind of a history kind of person too when it comes to the paranormal. But
Mm-hmm.
mine is more Old West and Civil War type time.
Mm.
But I used to live not too far from the gravesite of Morgan Earp.
Oh.
And I went there. I had a friend that was buried in that cemetery, but um, also I went to that cemetery when I learned that he was buried there, and I something told me ask the question, who fired the first shot at the OK Corral? And of
Uh-huh.
course, I didn't expect to get an answer. But and of course I lost the recording. It was on a
Oh,
computer. I never downloaded it. But the recording said Wyatt did.
nice.
And I would love to find a way to go back to Tombstone and kind of confirm that with some historians. Of course, I know there's going to be different sides, the Earp
Right.
side versus the Clant side, and that nobody's going to agree. But I still would love to kind of get that energy from the OK Corral and see if that was the case.
Oh, yeah. That would be amazing.
Now, getting into the second book, what are some of the locations in that book?
Oh, well, like I said, I included some um, historic villages, including the one that she told me, that the hostess told me about in England. Um, but one of the historic villages that is very, very dear to my heart is Billy Creek Village in Indiana. And we're actually, my fiance and I are actually going there, leaving on Friday, and we've got a book fair at the village on Saturday, which is going to be just fantastic. So we were going with a friend a couple years ago. Um, we were going to Whispers Estate in Indiana for an investigation. And I looked at the map. I had been to Billy Creek Village once before, and I knew how fantastic it was. So I looked at the map, realized that the route we were taking to Whispers was going to take us within spitting distance of Billy Creek Village. So I said, "Oh, can we do a side quest, please? I got to show you guys this place because it's so cool." So we spent a couple hours there, um, just poking around, and we were at the Civil War house. The Billy Creek Village is a village made up, and a lot of these, that's how a lot of these historic villages are, is the historical society, the preservation society in charge of the village, collects buildings from the area and brings them to this site. And that's exactly what happened with Billy Creek, is they bought buildings from elsewhere and brought them to the site. So um, there's a central square with a couple of houses and the schoolhouse, the general store, a couple of churches, a Baptist and a Catholic church, centered around this central square. And then about, oh, half a mile away, there's the Civil War house. So we just had an absolute blast kind of walking around the village. This was in early February, so there wasn't hardly anyone there. The caretaker was there with his girlfriend, and that was it. And then the three of us were there. So very pristine and not very many people walking around and polluting the evidence. But we said, all right, so we've got maybe, I don't know, 45 minutes or so before we have to leave for Whispers. Let's go ahead and explore one building in the town. Let's concentrate on one building. So we had heard a lot of stories about the Civil War house. So we're like, well, let's just concentrate on that for 45 minutes or so. So we drove over there, and the caretaker let us in and just said, put the lock back on the hasp when you're done, and we were happy to do that. So Roger stayed on the first floor, and he was filming, walking around with his camera, and James and I went up to the second floor. I said, "Oh man, sweetie, you got to check out the second floor. It's really really neat. Come on upstairs with me." So he and I went there. There are two doors that lead to the upper floor, but one of them is blocked off and locked, and you just don't use that door. So you
Mhm.
use just the one at one end of the house. So we walked up the stairs and got into the upper floor, which is pretty much all open. A couple of bedrooms up there, but it's all nice and open. And this is a beautiful sunny day, broad daylight. So we were exploring the upper floor and worked our way all the way to the far corner of it, and then kind of wandered our way back. And we said, let's go see what Roger's doing. Let's he's bopping around downstairs filming. Let's go see what he's doing. So we headed back down the stairs. Now the stairs leading to the second floor in the Civil War house, there are half a dozen steps or so. Then there's a landing, and the staircase turns 45 degrees, and then there's another half a dozen steps, and then you're in the first floor. So I went first, got to the landing. James is behind me on the stairs, and I turn and I realize that there's a door in front of me. The door's closed. And I said, "That's kind of odd. I wonder why Roger would have shut the door on us. That's very strange."
Mhm.
So I kind of tented my fingers and pushed at the door, thinking it was going to open right away. And it didn't. It was jammed pretty hard. I actually had to put the flat of my hand and shove to get this door open. So that's what we did. I shoved, the door creaked open, and James and I came tumbling down the steps, and Roger happened to be there at the bottom of the steps.
Well,
And we're like, "Dude, why'd you close the door on us?" And Roger said, "There's a door?" He didn't even know the door was there, because when it's
wow.
open, it's flush against the wall. You don't even notice it.
Yeah.
So he had no idea it was even there. And the interesting part was that he was filming. He was filming in the front bedroom of the house, and he heard a thump, and he thought that it was us upstairs making noise.
Mhm.
But we recreated it, and that thump that he heard was the door closing
Wow.
while he was in the front bedroom several rooms away from the door.
Wow. So,
Yeah.
um, what are some of like the amusement parks that or any other location in that book?
Oh, well, like I said, in the second book, in Endless Summer, there are three haunted botanical gardens, and all three of them are haunted for different reasons. One of them's in Chicago, and that is haunted because there was a security guard whose mother would bring him lunch, an overnight security guard whose mother would bring him lunch every night. And she went to bring him his lunch on a very cold, wintry, blizzardy Chicago night and lost her way on the paths in the park in the snow. And by the time she found a building and got let in, she was suffering from hypothermia and passed away. So that's the Chicago Botanical Gardens. That's why that's haunted. Um, the Denver Botanic Gardens is haunted for the same reason Lincoln Park Zoo is in Chicago, because it's built over an old city cemetery.
Wow.
So
All right.
there's that.
So are there are oh, let me rephrase that question because I
Okay.
started to say it. What are some of the locations that maybe you have visited but haven't written about yet?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Um, Hmm, that's a really good question. Uh, I am planning a third volume, so I will be writing about them. Uh, one of the things there are several more museums that I want to write about. Um, a couple of English museums that I would like to visit when I go back to England. Um, Gosh, I can't think of any off the top of my head that I've been there and not written about yet, vacation wise.
It gives you something to think about for the future books.
Sorry to disappoint you with that answer, but
No, no worries. Like I said, it makes interesting content for a new book.
yeah.
Now, what are the follow-up question to that? What are some of the locations that you would love to visit that you haven't visited?
Oh man. Well, okay, this kind of fudges the question a little bit, but um, so I've been to England 3 times, and 2 of those times I was not yet a paranormal investigator. These were back in college, so I wasn't really into it yet. But both of those times, I ended up visiting a castle called Warwick Castle. It's about half an hour away from London, and I absolutely fell in love with the place. It is so beautiful, and the grounds and the gardens are just plain gorgeous. And it is haunted too. So I really wanted to go back to Warwick Castle the last time I visited England because now I'm a paranormal investigator. Now I know what I'm doing. Um, but I didn't. We went all sorts of places in 3 weeks, but we didn't get to go to Warwick Castle. And I want desperately to go back because I actually put Warwick Castle in the second volume of Grave Deeds and Dead Plots because one of the hauntings at the castle involves a murder.
Wow.
So, Sir Fulk Greville was murdered by his manservant in the late 1600s and died in the castle. So his ghost is one of the many that haunts Warwick Castle. So, yeah, I would love to go back to Warwick Castle and actually investigate this time.
Yeah, and before I move on, I want to let everybody know if you got questions for my guest Sylvia, please feel free to pop them in the chat. I will ask her if
Yeah.
you got any questions. But anyways, I because I would love to get over to England and Ireland because a lot of my heritage is from there, or especially Ireland. Um, there's a brewery with my last name in it over in Dublin,
Cool.
and a lot of castles that I would love to visit over there. I think it's the Ramp Inn in England. I would love
The
to check out
Ram
that
Inn.
place.
Oh my gosh, I would love to go there. Yeah.
And now I've visited a lot of places overseas because of the military being in the Navy. You get to go to Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, Turkey, Greece, and
Ooh.
Israel. But back then I didn't have time to actually check out haunted location, and I wasn't thinking about it. I was more interested in looking at the old towns of Italy and Spain, not the modern cities, but the old ancient or older, like 1500, 1600 towns, and the history of it more than the hauntings of it. Now, I would love to get back over to some of those places, but I'm more stuck here in the U.S. Uh, unless find a way to make more money from this podcast. But
Well, we'll work on that.
I'm working on it. Now you did mention grave deeds and dead plot. What you mentioned before the show when me and you were talking, but tell the
Yeah,
listeners, viewers, little bit about those books.
sure. So when I was working on a book that came out several years ago, when I was working on Days of the Dead, that was a ghost story for every day of the year. And I realized that a lot of the stories I was finding for each of these days had their roots in true crime. They were the result of murders. So I realized that the line between, as I was saying before the show started, the line between true crime and paranormal is vanishingly thin anyway. So I realized that I could collect these stories that are true crime based that have resulted in hauntings and make a series of books about it. And I've got enough material for, gosh, like half a dozen books. So, and two of them are out so far.
Okay,
And yeah,
so
that's been a real blast is doing these, hunting down these true crime cases that have ghost stories attached to them.
how did you get into writing like those books, that topic? Was it just something random spur of the moment, or was it uh, just researching other things, other paranormal stuff, and it happened to come up? And I think you did
Well,
mention about that.
yeah, this one actually came about because several years ago, probably it was about 10 or 11 years so far, previous to this, one of my publishers asked me to write a true crime book. And in my day job, I'm a librarian, so I know from books. And at the time, and for many, many years before this, it was the custom, I guess, or the fashion for an author to write a true crime book about one case. And, if the case was unsolved, they would try to put their own spin on it, whatever. And I said, man, I don't think I have the chops. I'm just a little ghost story writer. I don't think I have the chops to do a true crime book on one case, sustain an entire book on one case. I don't think I'm that good
Yeah.
yet. But in the past 5 or 6 years or so, it has become the fashion for true crime writers to, there's still books that are written on just one case, but it's become the fashion for true crime writers to make a book out of several cases, make a collection of stories. And when I came up with this idea about true crime cases that have resulted in hauntings, I contacted this publisher. I said, "How would you feel about this collection of stories?" And that would be the theme of it, is every one of these cases has resulted in a ghost story. And he absolutely was over the moon about that idea. So I said, "Well, great, I'll do it." So I just started collecting stories, and I've put out 2 volumes so far. And as I said, there are plenty more planned.
Now, are there big names, crime stories, or stories in those books, or are they just smaller type?
Some of a little from column A, a little from column B. In one of them, I wrote about the Villisca Axe murders. So there are well-known stories in there. And then I tried to put other stories in there that people might not be as familiar with, but were nonetheless fascinating. There is one of the stories that I really, really enjoyed doing is the case of, oh, Celia Rose. She lived in Ohio in the 1880s. And with a name like Celia Rose, growing up in a place called Pleasant Valley, Ohio, you might be picturing a young lady with cascades of blonde curls, with porcelain skin, whose greatest joy is to sit and do embroidery and snack on strawberries with cream. You would be wrong. Celia Rose was a very plain young lady. She was kind of dumpy. She was an oops baby. She came along very late in her parents' marriage. She had an older brother who was older by, I think it was like 21 years older than she was. But when she was in her early 20s, she developed a life-threatening crush on the boy next door who was only 17. And she mooned over him. She would go over there and watch him plow the fields and just really was taken with him. And she was just convinced herself that they were going to get married someday. And he's like, no, I no, we're not going to get married. I don't
Yeah.
even. His brother was like, guy's got a girlfriend. He's not interested in you.
Yeah.
And so Guy's father said, he went to Celia's father and said, look, you got to take your daughter in hand here. She's bothering my family. She's hanging out around my son. She's annoying him. Just keep her in hand, keep her
Mm.
under control. So everyone was sore at Celie. And her father was like, well, you can't go over there and hang out and just bother these people. Just don't do that anymore. You're not
Mm.
going to get married. You're not going to end up with this guy. So Celie's mind worked very slowly, but it did work. So she decided to take away these stumbling blocks to her imagined romance. And she ended up putting rat poison in the family's cottage cheese.
Wow.
And she ended up killing her brother and her father. And her mother was getting better, and her mother suspected that she'd been poisoned, and so had her husband and son. And she kind of realized that it was Celie who had done it because she wanted to be with this neighbor kid.
Mm.
And she's like, well, we're going to have to move because we're never going to be able to show our faces in society around here, so we have to move. And Celie was like, nope, nope, nope. So she dosed her mother's bowl of bread and milk the next morning with some more rat poison and killed off her mother too. So
Yeah.
she was caught and confessed and brought to trial. She was found not guilty by reason of insanity and spent the rest of her life in a prison for the insane. So that's a story that's not as well known as the Villisca Axe murders, but I
Yeah.
thought it was really interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, it makes an interesting story. Like I know my
Yeah.
friend out in Beverly Hills, David Oman, uh, has written more, not about so much about the murders, but the Charles Manson murders, but more
Mm.
about the hauntings that go on at his place. But
Good. Yeah, I
Sharon
did write
Tate
about
and
that as
stuff.
well.
You have written about that, or
I have, yeah.
okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
because I could tell you plenty of stories that about that place because I've investigated that place over 200 times. Uh,
whoa.
um,
I've
well,
never been, but I'm sure it's intense.
well, the home itself wasn't built or wasn't there when the murders happened. The house next
Mhm.
door has a whole completely different story. But like I said, I could give you plenty of stories on
Yeah.
that place. But
Mhm.
like I said, he writes more about the ghost stories, but he kind of does incorporate the crime of that happening and
Yeah.
why the ghosts are there. But let's see what we got. We got about 2 minutes before we start heading out. But what are your thoughts on your time in the paranormal? Or how? Let me restart. How long have you been in the paranormal field? Because, like for me, I started when I was 5 years old. Basically, that's when I first had my
Oh,
first sighting, and I never lost interest in the paranormal except for 6 years ago. Like I said, I retired from the field because too much infighting and everything else.
wow. Yeah.
Um, I'd rather just talk about it nowadays,
Gotcha.
or if I'm gonna investigate, I'd do it on my own, so that I
Mhm.
don't have to worry about any infighting in the paranormal field. But um, how long have you been in the paranormal field?
Well, like I said, I've always been entranced with ghost stories, and my father was really, my father was a huge reader as well, and he enjoyed the paranormal as well. So I really picked it up from him. So I've been interested in the paranormal for most of my life, but I've been an investigator for oh about 16 years now.
Okay. Not too shabby. I mean, like I said,
Yeah.
I started in 1992 when I had
Hmm.
my first or did my first investigation. It was in Northern California. Don't want to get into too much of the story, but it was basically a haunted farmhouse, and I used to walk past it because I worked up there, and I would have to
Hmm.
walk into town, probably about a 5 minute, 10 minute walk, and I would always pass by this farmhouse. And one time I walked past it, there was animals in the yard, and I thought nothing of it. I thought, okay, there's farmland here. There's gonna be
Uh-huh.
animals around. Well, I get past the property, and something said, "Turn around, look." I turn around, look, nothing. The animals are all gone. No place for them to run that quick.
Oh
um,
my.
so that's what got me into the paranormal field. I went in there, investigated the place. A little spooky, especially since the people that I was with that said, "Let's go check this out," decided to bring
Hmm.
a Ouija board with them.
Oh,
Eh,
okay.
uh, but that's a story for another day. But yeah,
Hmm.
it just got me into the field. But I mean, as far as enjoy the paranormal, like I said, I had my first ghost experience when I was 5 years old.
Hmm.
Traveling across country when I was a teen. Most kids wanted toys if they were traveling across country. Me, no. I wanted a book on Bigfoot. Uh,
Excellent.
so it was more of that side of things interested me more. And then I've investigated places all across the country. The Oman House is probably the one I've done the most, just because the team that I worked with out there, we helped run the tours. Of course, I was the one that monitored like 24, 28 cameras. So
Oh wow.
while we had a psychic do the seances, we had another lead investigator leading people around, and of course, I went there because I'm a hyper empath, so I can see and communicate with the spirits, and
Mm,
I
what
could
a
help
gift.
other people if need be. But I didn't want to know too much about the going ons there, especially the first time I went there. I was like,
Hmm.
don't tell me anything about this location other than the murders happened down the road. That's all I want to know because
Hmm.
I didn't want to be tainted. But in this story right here, you feel free to use it in your book. But I went there and we're driving along. I'm looking at my phone, looking at the map, like, okay, where did we have to turn off? And something told me to zoom in on the location just to see the house and everything like that. And I got the strong feeling, and we're 60 miles away from the house, mind you, still on the freeway. And I don't know nothing about the house other than the murders down the
Hmm.
road. And I got the strong feeling there's a portal there. Trying to show my friend driving, and he said, "Just tell me about it, and then show me when we get there." Well,
Yeah.
I tell him about it. I show him when we get there, and tell him about it. And I said, "This is the spot where I was seeing." And he knew David before me, so he knew David, but had never really been there.
Hmm.
And he had that look, like the goosebumps on his arm, is like, what the heck? So he goes, we went, knocked on the door, and he goes, "Tell David what you told me." And I took him out to the spot, pointed out the spot where I felt the portal,
Yeah.
and 60 miles away. And he goes, he had a shocked look on his face. He was like, how? And he goes, did you tell him anything about it? I was like, he's like, no, I didn't tell him nothing. He didn't want to know. He
Mm.
goes, when his house was being built, a 5 gallon
Mm.
bucket of water tipped uphill, which is impossible, in the same
Oh,
exact spot that I pointed out.
oh my.
And
Oh
there's plenty of other stories I got from there, but uh,
my.
don't want to make the show about me. It's about you. So um, let's see. We got about 4 minutes before we get out of here. But how can people find out more about you and your books?
Well, I have a website. It's sylviashultz.com, and that's Shults. So you can find out about all of my books there. There's a tab at the top of the page that says paranormal nonfiction, and there's a contact me button too. So if anyone wants to reach out with, my best friend is someone who's told me a ghost story I haven't heard yet, and so yeah, I have a recurring segment on there that I every Monday morning I post like I said, I read voraciously and omnivorously, and I'm always coming across these really nifty facts that if they're news to me, they might be news to other people. So every morning I post something on there that's called Today I Learned. And so that's just a fun little way to start the week of
Uh, and
some interesting fact that maybe you haven't heard yet.
And of course, my producer was showing your website up there for people to take a about. Now, before we head out, she wanted to hear more about Peoria State Hospital.
Oh, okay. Well, it is the site of uh, a former asylum. It was open from 1902 to 1973. Uh, and when you say haunted mental asylum, your mind goes all American Horror Story on you, and you assume that there was pain and fear and abuse. And it is my privilege and my joy to tell people that was not the case at the Peoria State Hospital. This was a place where the patients were treated like family members. The first superintendent, Dr. George Zeller, was just one of the most compassionate men I've ever heard about. And his wife, too, was deeply invested in the care of these patients. They wanted to make a place where the patients felt at home. He put together a cottage system and put a married couple in charge of each cottage. So it would feel more like a place like home. Um, all of the hospitals and cottages were not locked except for the violent wards for the men and for the women. Oh, there were the only two wards on the entire hilltop that were locked. He said, these people don't lock their doors at home. Why would we lock them in when they've come to us for help? So it was just really an astounding place for the care of the mentally ill.
Yeah, because I know there are a lot of insane asylums that the care was not that great,
Just awful.
and I do have a on Friday night. I'm asking a lot of what if questions for Friday night's open discussion show, and
Mhm.
there is one part on there that I'm going to be talking about what if on asylums. Um,
Mm.
so I don't want to give away too much about it. I'll let people tune in and listen for themselves. But I
Oh,
want
yeah.
to thank you for coming on the show. It was a pleasure having you on once again,
Thank you
and
so much for having me.
and I'll have you stick around after the show. Uh, talk briefly after the show, and like I
Okay.
said, I got plenty of stories that I could give you about different hauntings all across the country. What I've seen, because like I said, most of my stuff is out in California that I've done, but I did a lot when I was in Fort Worth too, the Fort Worth
Ah.
stockyards, learning a lot of the history there. Goatman's Bridge north of Fort Worth.
Mm.
um, So I got a lot of stories that I can tell you about. But like I said, we don't have enough time in the show. But we got about 5 minutes. So again, thank you for coming on the show. And it was a pleasure having you on.
It was my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
All right. And for those listening, viewing, please welcome Talking Tonight's newest, well, kind of newest sponsor. It's been about 3 weeks now. The Haunting You podcast. If Halloween is your thing, and you're a home haunter in need of some tricks to add to that extra scare to your home haunt this year, check out Haunting You podcast by going to talkingtonight.com and clicking on the Haunting You podcast logo to take you to their site. And of course, if you are enjoying Talking Tonight, why not take a piece of the show with you? Visit talkingtonight.com, hover over the more, and then Talking Tonight merch store for t-shirts, coffee mugs, small caps. Your support helps keep the conversation going. And of course, new merch will be coming out September 1st. And if you want to put your business in front of passionate late night audience, then Talking Night is now welcoming advertisements to the sponsors. Reach listeners and viewers interested in the topics discussed on the show. Visit talkingnight.com to learn more or contact us today at talkingnight@outlook.com. Grow your business with Talking Night. Now, we do have a couple minutes here. So I want to mention what we got coming up on Friday. Friday night, open lines, open discussion where you, the listeners, viewers, can call and share your stories, experiences, ask questions about any of the topics the show covers: the paranormal, cryptozoology, ufology, conspiracies, alternative health, technology, or just about anything else you can think of. As long as it's not vulgar or anything like that, we're good. So join me this Friday. We got a main topic of discussion for Friday night is we're going to be asking a lot of different what if questions, mainly about the paranormal, cryptozoology, ufology. Maybe a little bit about conspiracies. But we're going to get into some what if questions. And of course, if you got what if questions that you would love to ask, feel free to join the chat and pop it in there if you don't want to call in. It doesn't matter to me. I just would love to hear from you, the viewers, listeners to the show. So I want to thank everybody. And if you haven't seen already, we got September's shows up on the talkingnight.com website now, where you can see what we got coming up in September as well. So again, thank you to my guest, Sylvia, for coming on the show again. And until next time, I shall see you on the dark side. Good night from Talking Tonight.